had a few listener questions coming as well, sort of on a few different tangents, but sort of all linking together as well, and looking at what's happening post the technical freeze, and especially all the new winglets we've seen pop up on various bikes this year. And Eggy has asked, what is the difference between the MotoGP wings that were banned 2 years ago and the ones that we have now, looking especially at the Aprilia? They seem to be sort of just as harmful.
What we can say, we actually call them side pods because they must return. Okay, they can't literally go directly out and have literally single planes, shall we call them. They have to return back in the bike. There is a minimum size that return has to be, and Aprilia have just gone to the complete limit of what is considered safe. So they've gone to think. I understand what your viewer says. I agree that they're sort of getting more and more to what they used to be like. But what we don't allow is what we call strides coming out, or fins, shall we call it. There's no fins out the side. It has to be go out, if you can see, and go back in. And that's what we see. The original Ducatis, there were fins sticking out everywhere, all over the place.
What happened back in the day I mean, there were a lot of rider complaints about the amount of air that was being moved around them. And I remember, I think it was Bradley Smith at Phillip Island particularly was quite vocal about it. Does that still, do riders still mention how much the aero is affecting them on a motorbike, or has that sort of gone away?
Not to me directly. If they do it in the safety commission, I don't know, but no one's come to me, because if the safety commission and the riders, which is purely the riders and Dorna and Mike Webb and Loris Capirossi and Franco Ancini, if the riders say, look, hey, I'm having problems, there's turbulence in this bike, then I'm sure Carmelo will come to me or us and say, look, okay, now it stops. When there's a safety issue, that's the only time us as the organisers can overrule the manufacturers. We can say, okay, we are banning this for safety. And that's the clause we have.
Okay. In terms of and this is just, I suppose this might be purely for my benefit and hopefully our listeners as well, in terms of the technical freeze, it's a subject we talked about all year long, and obviously that was slightly elongated through the COVID pandemic, but that is obviously coming to an end in 2022. What do you think that might do in terms of the competition that we're currently seeing in the field? Because, looking back at this season, it's been immense in terms of, the amount of manufacturers and different teams scoring podiums, front rows and wins. Yes, it looks like Ducati are certainly coming on strong towards the end of the season and going into next. But do you think that it'll be the technical freeze will favour certain manufacturers over others, or do you think it might allow for more of an even playing field, or do you think it's a danger of actually sort of taking the competitiveness that we've seen this year away?
I'm hoping it will allow the other manufacturers to catch up, because obviously Ducati have made big strides. You look at the last race in Valencia, the top three. Now that the other manufacturers can now start developing their engine spec for next year, they can upgrade their aero package as well. So let's hope that will happen and we'll keep the field close together. It could obviously go the other way, where Ducati could then make another step, as Kiva said, with 8 bikes. But the aero package if we talk about that, is obviously per rider. And I don't think any manufacturer could have that luxury of making an aero package defined for each rider. Formula One car is very two-dimensional. It's like this. With the bike, it's the angles that they do. It's very hard, and every rider is slightly different. But going back to your question, I hope that it will give the opportunity for the Honda. And I think you probably saw it more in Jerez last week, where Pole was badly beat up from what happened in Valencia. But even he said the Honda seemed to make a big step with what they brought out. They already brought out a new aero package, if you saw that as well, new side pods, winglets. So that seemed to have pushed them closer to Ducati.
Just clear up for me just one thing, and it's something I know I should know, but again, I've not been there for a week. All the Ducatis, all of the motorbikes, is that a separate aero package for each rider? Can we have 8 different aero packages for the 8 different Ducatis, for instance? And how does that swap about? How do they relate with each other?
Basically, yes, they can. The rules allow the aero package, which is different from engine. Aero package is per rider basis. So each rider can have their own design if they want to. It doesn't happen, in all honesty, very rarely. What you would tend to find with Ducati is that the satellite teams will have the previous year's version. So they filter that down. But as a rule, it's purely per manufacturer. But the rules do allow it if they wanted to. If a rider is too big, they can make slight changes to it, and it's for him only. Yeah.
And are those changes, when you say slight changes, so you can make slight modifications within the rules, but what about changing that aero package? Is it still one time during the year that you're able to change it, I seem to remember, per rider?
Yes, if we start from next year, 22, we go back to the pre-COVID rules. So yes, the normal rules are you start Qatar, or the first event, if it's Qatar, which it should be, they have to present that aero package for each of their riders, and then they're allowed one upgrade during the year. The aero package is split into four areas as well. Remember that, 4 areas, which is the fender.
What are those 4 areas again? Remind an old geezer.
Yeah, you have the front fender, the main fairing, as we call it, area A, which is where the spoon is, that area at the back underneath the wheel, and then what we call others, which is basically fault covers. So they can upgrade each of those once per year.
Do you actually sleep at night, Danny, or are you dreaming about this all night long? Unbelievable.
I'm very lucky. I do sleep very well for some reason. I'm not quite sure, but it does great in a lot of people I work with because I do sleep well. But I think gin and tonic helps.
A good 8 hours always. Danny, looking a bit more into the future, and we've debated this time and time again. We talk about Moto E, and we have a lot of questions coming in as well, looking at sustainability. Keith doing the eyeballs for those watching on YouTube. And we look, of course, MotoGP is a world championship, and we are always looking to become more sustainable and greener. Hybrid systems, e-fuels, is that something you're starting to look into going into the future?
We are definitely going into biofuel. This is something that Dorna is working very hard at the moment with Corrado Ceccanelli. He's the Director of Technology, and I work very close with him. And he's a great guy to work with, and he's pushing that forward. And we're hoping, hopefully by 24, to have a mixture of biofuel in the championship. So that's definitely the way forward for us.
Is there any collaboration between you and F1 technical? Do you collaborate in any way whatsoever? Is there any kind of conversation that goes on between the MotoGP rule makers and F1 guys?
No, not with me personally. The FIM might have some sort of collaboration, but not me personally, no.
Okay. We've had a very important question, actually, which we might just have time to squeeze in because we are running out of time, unfortunately. But Ian Duffers has asked, is your golf swing still bad?
It's actually got worse with old age.
You're not using the right clubs, technically.
But
well, that's a Crash Day exclusive,
by the way.
Good to hear from you.
He still owes you money. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Ian, for messaging in. He's part of he was part of the listener question, so we've got a listener there. That's one at least, so we're doing well.
We can do without him.
Yeah. Yes.
Didn't mean Ian.
Is he a heckler, not a listener, isn't
it? Danny, look, I know there's so much more we can talk with you about, but I suppose one final question for you, or if Keith and Pete have something desperate, feel free to tuck that in after. But what are you most looking forward to for 2022?
Normality, really. Getting back to a bit of normal life in the paddock, because Dorna and Erta have done an amazing job over the last 2 years to have 15 races in 20 and 18 this year. And I know what they've had to do behind the scenes to organise those races. It's not been easy. And I think it's, with the COVID and the sad situation we're in the world, I think it was a little bit of time that people could get away from that and watch bike racing. And we've had some amazing bike racing over the last 2 years, and I'm sure it's helped a lot of people. Sounds a little bit gushy, but I must obviously thank Dorna and Erta for what they've done over the last 2 years to just keep this championship going. It's not been easy, but 22. Let's continue the good racing we've got. Hopefully, we have as close as we've been having, and we get a safe full season.
I think we'll be hoping for that as well. Well, listen, MotoGP Technical Director Danny Aldridge, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the Crash MotoGP podcast. We'll have to catch up with you again next season as well at some point. Yeah. But for now, thank you so much, Danny.
It's been my pleasure. Take care, guys. See you soon.
Right, well, what a great time to be joined by Danny Aldridge. So we do bring you all the best guests in the off season. Don't go anywhere. We're regular until the end of November, and we're still going to be with you all throughout the off season. And we've still got more to chat about, haven't we, boys? Because there's been some testing going on. Of course, there's still some action, some hidden liveries, some new prototypes and riders going around Jerez for some testing. Pete, perhaps if we come to you on this first, you've been keeping us up to date on Crash.net with everything that's been happening. What's been catching your eye at the moment? Can you give us a little bit of a summary as to what's been going on over these test days?
Yeah, sure. So, the headline lap time was Bagnaia, yet again continuing this form that we saw at the end of the season. Fastest for most of the last day. He was fastest by almost a second. And then, the others closed in to be just under half a second from him, Fabio Quartararo. But some more Ducati domination, should we say, at the end of the season. And then you had a bit like Danny was speaking about. Honda, we saw again, have brought this all-new bike, two slightly different versions. I think they had a slightly different engine in each of the bikes that they made available to Pole, Espargaro, and then the LCR riders, Nakagami and Alex Marquez. And that seems to have made a big step, certainly in the area that they're looking for, which is rear grip. So that was quite encouraging for them. On Yamaha's side, not so encouraging from Quartararo. He was saying that the bike was basically the same. Now, that's quite a surprise because they've got really one chance left, which is the Sepang and Indonesia test, because after that, you're going into the race weekend in Qatar, and as Daniel Aldridge was saying, everything's locked down then. So, you've got to test your engine before then, and the last chance will be at Sepang now. So I think Fabio, he said at Misano that he was really hoping, I think was his words, to have some horsepower at this test, and it didn't arrive. He said the bike was basically the same. He didn't really feel much difference. So, I think, there was no guarantees of what's to come. He's just sort of crossing his fingers, it seems. So a bit of a surprise there. Over at Suzuki, we've heard similar comments, haven't we, from Fabio and from Mia, that they're worried the bike is dropping back from the Ducati. And we saw that at Suzuki, they made a big push. I mean, they brought not only Sylvain Guintoli, but also the Japanese test rider, Suda, over. Now, I can't remember the last time since COVID started that a Japanese test rider was flown over to a European test. So, that would be quite a good statement. And bear in mind, there was also a lot of new parts as well, chassis, engine, aero, all these kind of things. So Mia, when he walks in the garage, he's seeing all of these test riders. He's seeing all of these new parts. It's a good sign because that's what he wants to see. He wants to see a big push on the technical front. He was cautiously optimistic, I guess, is how you would describe Mir. A pretty, as we say, a bit of a unique situation because they have concessions, so they can keep developing their engine during the season. So they're not in such a rush. Vinales was working on braking, setup, that kind of thing. And KTM, well, if you look at the timesheets, they were the one that was sort of hanging back the most, if you like. A lot of different parts again, but it seemed like from what Oliveira was saying, all of these parts are being tried separately. They're yet to sort of put everything together into one package. So again, Sepang is going to be a big test for them to kind of see if they've changed the character of the bike. So I guess in a nutshell, that would be what the test showed us.
I don't get it. I have to say, I don't get it. I know I'm renowned as being a little bit on the thick side, but you've got all this stuff that's got to be tested. You're going to a track you've never been to when you go to Indonesia to test there. So you're going to have a couple of days testing at a track you've got no data on at all. So you've got no real idea. You've got no baseline. Jerez this week was windy, really windy. So it was a difficult test. They're nowhere near going as fast as, say, Maverick Vinales' outright circuit record, despite the fact that Bagnaia might have been a second faster than everyone else, but due to the conditions, it wasn't conducive to going really, really quick. And to test the backload of stuff they've got. I mean, Yamaha back foot again. When I read that about Quartararo saying, well, there's no difference, you just think, what? They're going to rely on Sepang, which will be like the Sweat Olympics again. When you go to Sepang, you could have a thunderstorm. I mean, I know it's not the time of year for thunderstorms, but, we're talking about Southeast Asia here. It can blow in. You can have an unfortunate week where the rains are there. So I don't get it. I mean, I just normally I would say that MotoGP run this really, really well, but and Danny, obviously there's been no approaches yet by any manufacturers to Danny and IRTA and the FIM and of course Dorna to extend the time into the start of the season. But I can genuinely see that happening. I mean, Yamaha otherwise are going to be right on the back foot. Ducati, the floodgates are open with Ducati. They're bringing little bits all the time. They've got 8 riders out there. They've got everything they need to test more and more and more during this off season when they're allowed to test it. But it's still not enough time. And if we are unfortunate and the weather is against for whatever reason, that test time is going to be eaten into even more. Jerez wasn't a perfect test for a lot of teams. I mean, not only not having everything they needed there, manufacturing timelines. If I remember rightly, correct me, Pete, if I'm wrong here, but I seem to remember when the Petronas team was being, projected, if you like. They needed June the 25th is in my head was the cutoff point for engineering the bikes for the next year. So June the 25th, middle of a year, was what they needed as an engineering timescale to get the second team's factory bikes prepped, machined, worked on together for the following year. So the timescale for the forward link to all of this stuff is so far in advance. To hear that Yamaha have not even got something to be trying last week, at Jerez, it blows me away. I got to say, I don't genuinely understand it. It feels almost like Ducati come 2022 are going to have such a technical advantage and such a testing advantage and such a rider advantage. The only thing that gives you real good hope, isn't it, is the fact, the rules are so good now. They're so tight without these little things like Danny was saying about the ride height. You got him on the ride height thing. He didn't want to have like the seamless gearbox, like aero, the ride height adjustment. That's the third big thing that's snuck up on the rule makers that the manufacturers have bunged in there, that have kind of wrong-footed everybody. I bet if you knew that was coming beforehand, you would have banned it, so it wouldn't have been allowed. But of course, once one manufacturer does it and gets it on the track, then everyone else is bound to. I always used to like the phrase from Danny when I used to chase him around the paddock and say, what's happening with this? What's happening with that technically? And he used to turn around and say to me, if you see it on the track, it's legal. That was his catch-all phrase. If you see it out there, it's legal. In other words, don't keep bothering me with all these little details, because I think everybody else was bothering him. And because I've known him for so long, I can walk in his office and ask. And that's never the easiest thing for a technical director when he's trying to keep everything under control and, of course, keep it confidential. I mean, the one thing I think that's where Danny is. He's such a wonderfully personable guy, and he's been a friend for a long time, and his dad was a friend before him, obviously, from my perspective, and yet he never gives anything away, because that's not the way it's done. He's a consummate professional, and of course you would never compromise your friendship with a man like Danny to try and get that inside information, because it would be the last piece of information and probably the last time you had a friendship with him. I just think this testing thing has got away a little bit, and I think the Yamaha are on their back foot. They are now going to have to force so much stuff through for next year, Pete.
But isn't it surprising, Keith? Because you think, look, the last time they were allowed to change this engine was 18 months ago, wasn't it? So what's been happening in the engine department since March 2020 in Qatar? How can there not be any developments? Is it that Gigi, to rewind a bit, Gigi Dall'Igna had a bit of a Zoom call with the media on the eve of this test. And he was kind of asked, well, look, because there was this technical freeze on the engine, did you move people to the chassis side? Did you reallocate things? And he said, well, no, you have your engine team and they're specialists. You have your chassis specialists, you have your aero guys. And he said, we've just continued normal development. And I'm sure all the manufacturers have done that. So, did the valve issue that Yamaha had, is that what their engine guys have been, preoccupied with? Certainly last year, trying to get those engines. They had 3 engines each, didn't they, to try and last the season? And then they've had to try and do a workaround probably for this season without changing the inside of the engine. But engine, for sure, we know they must have been doing something. But when you're coming to, as you say, Keith, basically the penultimate test, really, because you can group Sepang and Indonesia together as one test, can't you, technically, because it's so close. As you say, there's no time to pop back in the week in between and come out with a new engine. So, what's been going on there? And perhaps most worryingly, is Quartararo in the loop on all this? Because he's going to be pursued by all of the factories, isn't he, next year? And if he's going into the new year thinking, am I going to get a new engine? What's it going to be like? What's happening? He's talking about hoping that there's new parts for Sepang and things like that. Well, we know the first contracts, they tend to be done as early as January. They'll be signed. I mean, it's not the time to have your star rider sort of unsure of what's happening with bike development. I mean, I'm sure he would have told us if he said, look, okay, there was nothing here, but Yamaha have told me, Cal's working on this maybe, and it's under development and we'll have it for Sepang. There was none of that. He didn't seem any the wiser, other than what we have, which was the chassis and the aero, didn't make much difference, and we're still waiting on the engine.
He's not just a star rider, Pete. He is the Marc Marquez of Yamaha. There was no one else in that manufacturer doing anything. It's only him for Yamaha, and obviously Marc Marquez previously for Honda. I think it's a tricky time that having said that, Yamaha have won everything this year. VSP, Moto America, MotoGP, World Superbikes. They've stitched everybody up. So they can't be doing everything wrong, can they, when you consider it? But it just seems to be on a wing and a prayer for me. I mean, the Yamaha across, 4 cylinders across the frame works really well at a lot of tracks. It works really well at all of the tracks to a degree, but the V4s are better in other places, perhaps sometimes as well. I don't know. And with Yamaha not having the power of Petronas as a backup team this coming year, really, okay, it's still, the Malaysian-based team, but I can't. It doesn't seem to have the power behind it that it had coming into 2022. I mean, you've not got the Quartararo Morbidelli factory Yamaha type setup that Sepang Racing had over the last 2 or 3 years. When we move into next year, Razan Razali's team is purely just a MotoGP team with a bit of a loss of personnel here and there, and we really still don't know quite how that team's going to work and how it's going to gel come next year. I think I don't understand why the Yamaha particularly, I mean, Honda obviously got stuff out there. I mean, let's look at KTM. KTM's a good example. They lost concessions and they've slipped behind. Their development has slipped behind. What are they going to bring at the beginning of next year? I mean, you can be damn sure KTM are working overtime at the moment trying to get something through the engineering pipe to enhance their early season test. But it feels like it's going to be a frantic Malaysia. I mean, Sepang is going to be. I might take an holiday out there, just go and watch it.
Yeah. I think that'll be worth watching. It's cool. We
really will be.
We know how exciting 2022 is going to be. It's also going to field a few rookies as well. And I thought we should touch on how the rookies did out there, because we saw Fabio Di Giannantonio, fastest rookie, Ralph Fernandez, Rebbe Gardner making the step up. Of course, their first proper goes in anger. I know they've already had a test on the bike, but first long haul test, I suppose. Brad Binder as well. Darren Binder, I should say. I'm going to keep doing that on it. Darren Binder was going well, but he suffered a bit of a high side. What did you make of some of the rookies in action out there, Pete?